This Week with Bob Mueller on News 2.
This week,
and it's time to resign.
Calls for Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally to resign a result of his online communications with a scantily clad homosexual male.
We are seeking an injunction.
Metro fights back against the GOP-controlled legislature, trying to take authority away from the city, the mayor, and the Metro Council.
Are they going to be able to get the appropriate training to be able to care for patients down the road?
Tennessee's near-total abortion ban is forcing OB/GYN medical students to get training elsewhere. More in our This Week cover story.
And looking at things like boards that need to be reconstituted and changed.
Governor Lee defends dissolving the independent Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth in the face of the commission's scathing State of Kids report detailing Tennessee's struggle with foster care instability. Hello and welcome to This Week. Metro fights back against the state. Governor Lee defends rejecting nearly $2 billion federal education dollars. We begin, though, with calls for Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally to step down.
And it's time to resign.
Why is that?
You make those, you can tell.
Chapel Hill Republican Representative Todd Warner is calling on Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally to resign. In a release, Warner called McNally a predator for the comments he left on a young man's racy Instagram posts.
Do you have evidence of that, or why do you say that?
And somebody asked, watch the videos, look back at the posts.
Franklin McClure tells us he was 17 years old when McNally first connected with him through social media, but he says McNally didn't know his age.
He wasn't aware of my age, so I wouldn't, flag him on that, but I was 17 at the time.
Republican leaders distanced themselves from Warner after House session Thursday, saying he acted alone in his calls for McNally's resignation.
I don't think he's ever sat down and spoken to Lieutenant Governor in his tenure here, so I find it interesting that you would make a speculation without knowing the person, first of all. That's his opinion. As you can see, he signed it himself. No one else signed on to the letter. So it is what it is.
Democrats point to Warner's ties to a federal bribery and conspiracy investigation into former House Speaker Glenn Cassida and his aide Cade Cothran. McNally called for Cassida to resign amid the 2019 investigation.
I think you need to take a close look at the individual who issued that statement, and I would urge caution on his part. Something along the line of throwing rocks at glass houses.
The Tennessee Journal reports Warner ate dinner with Cothran at a Nashville steakhouse last week.
This has nothing to do with the FBI investigation.
Did Cade Cothran ask you to do this?
No.
We tried to catch up with McNally after Senate session Thursday morning.
Representative Warner is calling on you to resign.
But he didn't answer questions.
Tennessee's Senate passed another bill targeting transgender people. This one would prevent them from changing their sex status on their birth certificate or driver's license. Here's News 2's Adam Mincer.
It could cost the state nearly $2 billion in federal funding. But today, Senate Republicans passed a bill defining sex as a person's anatomy at birth.
If defining sex as it has traditionally meant for years in the dictionary cost us federal funds, there's something wrong with Washington, D.C.
Senator Kerry Roberts says his bill is simple. It moves the definition of sex from a section of Tennessee code about school facilities to apply that to all of state law.
We're not trying to pick a fight.
Yet the Tennessee trans community sees it as another attack and a bill that can leave out people born with blended sexual characteristics.
And have really horrifying and just confusing and not understandable consequences.
As a trans man, Henry Seaton says this bill also has an emotional impact.
We continue to send this message over and over again. That's just, we don't want trans people in Tennessee.
He doesn't know what this could do to his healthcare access, if it'll create more problems for him at the DMV, or make it illegal for him to be around children, considering the language in a new law restricting drag performances.
That definition of male or female impersonator can expand in a way that it wouldn't have been able to before. So it really just solidifies a path to being able to criminalize a trans person.
Senator Roberts dismissed those concerns.
It doesn't have anything to do with transgender. It doesn't have anything to do with LGBTQIA plus or anything.
The bill passed along party lines, with 6 Senate Democrats left wondering if it's worth it.
I don't know why on earth we would take the risk of losing $2 billion of annual federal funding in order to provide a definition that nobody really thinks needs fixing.
I looked at the fiscal note and I just shook my head.
President Biden signed an executive order this week aiming to increase the number of background checks needed to buy guns.
A new executive order on gun control signed on Tuesday by President Joe Biden. The order aims to increase the number of background checks to buy guns, promote more secure firearms storage, and ensure U.S. law enforcement agencies are getting the most out of a bipartisan gun control law enacted last summer. The president addressing the move in Monterey Park, California. The president visiting the community where a gunman stormed a dance hall near Los Angeles and shot 20 people, killing 11. Following a Lunar New Year celebration. It was a 26-year-old who wrestled the semi-automatic pistol away from the gunman. Brandon Say sharing with ABC how terrifying that moment was.
I feel like I was going to shoot another person, that I might cause the death of another human being. It's a very scary thought to think about.
Tuesday's action does not change U.S. law, but it directs federal agencies to ensure compliance with existing laws and procedures. Current federal law requires background checks to be run on all purchases from federally licensed gun dealers.
Another insulin maker plans to slash the price of several insulin drugs by up to 75% in the United States. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson has a look at when that could happen.
Novo Nordisk is the latest company to announce it is slashing the price of insulin by as much as 75%.
This is a critical step in the right direction. It's consistent with the president's call to action.
The White House celebrated the news and credited the pressure created by price caps included in last year's Inflation Reduction Act for people on Medicare.
It's a law that makes clear that the American people deserve and expect access to $35 insulin.
The move follows Eli Lilly's announcement earlier this month, capping monthly out-of-pocket insulin costs at $35. Each year, those changes could save hundreds of dollars for the 8 million Americans that depend on insulin. Novo Nordisk says their price cut won't kick in until January of 2024. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally responded to the call for his resignation, saying in part, "I serve at the pleasure of the members of the Senate and my caucus. As long as I have their confidence, I'm committed to the important work of this state." Now to our This Week cover story. Tennessee's strict abortion ban is forcing some medical students to leave the state to finish their training. Here's State Capitol Newsroom reporter Chris O'Brien.
With one of the strictest abortion laws in the country, Tennessee's medical students and residents are facing roadblocks.
We have to have certain numbers of abortions we have performed. So by them not even allowing us to have exceptions in this state, that limits our ability to access these cases that we are supposed to reach and build.
Now that abortions are illegal in Tennessee, many are going out of state to get the required training.
If we can't meet our numbers within the state, where can we go to meet our numbers so that we can become certified OBGYNs?
Back on Capitol Hill, there is now just one bill scheduled for discussion Wednesday to potentially add medical exemptions to the abortion law.
We're losing confidence every day that passes.
Knoxville Republican Senator Richard Briggs is one of the sponsors of the bill.
It can preserve the fertility of a woman. It can allow the women in the future to have children. It can allow women in the future to have families.
The bill originally laid out several scenarios where an abortion could legally occur. But after pushback from Tennessee Right to Life, a conservative anti-abortion lobbyist group, lawmakers published a new amendment Tuesday. It still does change the controversial affirmative defense language to reasonable medical judgment, but it gets rid of just about everything else. Briggs pushed back on those amendments, saying the original bill is what he stands by.
I haven't amended my bill at all. I think my bill is a very, very good bill. It's very clear.
The restrictions could force young medical professionals to look elsewhere.
They're not going to want to go to states where they have to worry about, are they going to be able to get the appropriate training to be able to care for patients down the road? Are they going to be risking their own freedom?
The CDC shows Tennessee has the 4th highest maternal mortality rate in the country, behind just Arkansas, Kentucky, and Alabama. In Nashville, Chris O'Brien.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back. Metro government is fighting back against the state legislature's passage of a law to cut the Metro Council in half.
The Metropolitan government filed a lawsuit seeking to enjoin the enforcement of the Metro Council Reduction Act that was passed by the legislature last week. We are seeking an injunction. We are asking the court to move expeditiously. At the very outset, let me say that this is very likely the most important lawsuit in the history of the metropolitan government.
Metro is challenging the law for many reasons.
We have two different paths to justify an injunction from the court. The first is simply a timing issue. It is too late, based on existing precedent very recently from the Tennessee Supreme Court. It is simply too late to be changing the rules for an election that has already started. Secondly, the path involves multiple constitutional defects based on the Tennessee Constitution.
Speaker Cameron Sexton said the state creates local governments and has an obligation to oversee local governments.
We've heard a lot from the legislature in the last few weeks about how local governments are the creature of the state. Well, that much is true. Metropolitan government is a creature of the state. But then we've also heard that the state legislature can change the local charters anytime it wants, and it has total authority to do that. That is flatly wrong. The state legislature does not have the constitutional authority to come in and change our charter without our approval.
Metro officials tried to resolve this without going to court, but were ignored.
The metropolitan government truly regrets being in this position. There are three branches of government. We first took our concerns to the legislative branch, where they were ignored. The amendment that we've discussed that would have addressed our concerns was voted down, almost exclusively on a party line vote. It was voted down. And then before we could take our concerns really to the governor, he signed the bill, and we went to the legislative branch. The governor, being the second branch of government, did not pay attention to our constitutional concerns. We literally have no choice but to go to the courts, the third branch of government. The courts have a long history of enforcing constitutional rights. Again, we did not ask to be here, but we had no choice. We are asking the courts to enjoin the statute because it's too late and it violates the constitutional rights of the metropolitan government and the people who live here and make a life here.
And Metro believes it will win.
Yes, because the law is really clear. This is not a political issue. I'm not here talking politics. I'm here talking constitutional law. And the Constitution could not be clearer on this. They cannot do this without giving us a chance to vote, and they cannot extend terms for a term other than 4 years. So the Constitution's clear. We expect to win.
Metro leaders point to individual rights being taken away by this law.
There are significant implications of the Federal Voting Rights Act in this case. We tried to raise those concerns with the legislature, and again, they were ignored. The 40-member council was part of a deal that was made between various constituencies in the county to make sure that the Metro Council would have adequate minority representation. The council had minority representation from the beginning in April of 1963, and today the diversity on the council is something we are proud of and is really important to the people of this county, and it has been for more than 60 years.
Metro leaders argue redrawing districts now punishes current candidates.
You have candidates who have been out there for 2 years campaigning to be, for instance, I want to run for council in District 27. Well, District 27 won't exist anymore. So candidates are going to have to look first to say, okay, where do I live? Am I in one of these districts? Yes. Where do I run for office? It's not fair. It is simply not fair to those candidates and the people who have been involved in those campaigns to change the rule and say you have 17 days to qualify in whatever district we throw you in because the state has made us do it. It's simply not fair.
Metro believes the state has overreached its authority.
my legal view is that the issue of whether our council is 40 or 20 or 27 or anything in between is a matter for the voters. And the voters need to decide that issue. And so that is our goal. This bill cannot be implemented because it is too late and it violates the Constitution and should be declared void.
But it's a fight Metro intends to win.
We did not start this fight. We are filing a lawsuit because we have to protect our constitutional rights. We didn't want this. We didn't want any of this to happen. We tried with back-channel communications. We tried with efforts from our Nashville delegation. By the way, let me say real fast, I meant to say this earlier. Our Nashville delegation in the legislature did an incredible job representing the interests of metropolitan government, and I am grateful for their work. So we do have these other bills out there. There are several. We have significant concerns about all of those bills directly affecting Metro for some of the same reasons, whether or not they are constitutional. We're having discussions. We're hoping that those bills can be amended in such a way that we will not have to file a lawsuit, but we are reserving the right to file a lawsuit if they do a bill that's unconstitutional.
This is a critical moment.
When you're living in it, it's hard to know when you were in the middle of an inflection point in history. But it's pretty clear this is an inflection point in history. The future of the relationship between the state and the metropolitan government will be dictated in large part by what happens in this lawsuit. And we are either going to have a future where the legislature can do whatever it wants to do without regard for our rights, without regard for the people who live here. That's one option. The other option is they have to respect our constitutional rights.
Maybe the most important moment for the future of Metro government.
I don't believe there's a case in the history of Metro that's more important than this one. The outcome of this case will determine the history of state and local relations for decades to come. So we ask the court to protect our rights.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back. We caught up with Governor Lee this week in Perry County, where he outlined a $10 million economic expansion that will bring 150 new jobs to the economically depressed Perry County. We also asked him about dissolving an independent board overseeing children and youth in the state and rejecting federal education dollars. Governor Lee visited the NYX automobile parts production facility in Linden and economically depressed Perry County to announce a company expansion that will result in hundreds of new jobs. After the event, he was asked why he is abolishing the Independent Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth following its scathing report on the state of kids and Tennessee's struggle with foster care instability at a level not seen in the rest of the country.
You know, what we have done throughout the last year is assess the challenges that we have in Department of Children's Services in particular. We all are aware of the nationwide shortages of workers. We consequently took a new strategy and a new approach. We did away with old processes and old ways. We modernized our pay structure for caseworkers and have subsequently begun to hire over 50 caseworkers so far. We need many more, and we're moving that direction. Major investments in the way that we place children and how we place those children. We've improved the process where we don't have kids, for the most part, in offices. We now have them placed in facilities more appropriate for them. And looking at things like boards that need to be reconstituted and changed, including that one board and the responsibilities of it to be put into departments of the state so that we can more effectively serve kids. It is a part of the change on that board, and the proposed changes there are part of a broad new strategy that we have to do right by these kids and to have a better process for children in the state.
The governor was also asked if he supports a move to reject nearly $2 billion in federal education funding.
What we should do is remind ourselves that the most important thing we can do is make sure Tennesseans are served. That whether it's Department of Education or regardless of the department, that Tennesseans are served and they're served well. That we don't let anyone slip through any cracks and that we don't give up services for Tennesseans. But what we also should remember is the federal government doesn't know best what we need in Tennessee. So we've got to strike the balance and find a way forward to make sure that we more effectively serve Tennesseans. No sacrifice of services, but without some of the strings attached or some of the federal rules and regulations that come with federal dollars. We know best in Tennessee what our students need, what our educational needs are. We think we can find that way forward.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. We hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week, and you have a great week.